Hey everyone, it's Dave Fishy Repeat here, or Kiwi Sung Nam Ja, and in this video I'll be explaining everything there is to know about drone fishing. I'll mainly be using the Mavic Air 2 with the Gannet Sport release and the new Aeroo Pro as reference, but the majority of tips and tricks described in this video apply to all drone fishing. In this video we'll be covering the following 8 topics. 1. Choosing what fishing drone suits your needs best, including why I use the Mavic Air 2 and why I chose the Aeroo Pro for my next drone. 2. How to set up and use your fishing drone, including the extra attachments I use and many more tips and tricks. 3. Deciding which fishing rig I like to use, including why I always use a sacrificial trace. 4. Showing what rod and reel setups I use. 5. Choosing where and when to drone fish, and probably not today. 6. Understanding the drone aviation rules before you fly. And 7. I show you some of the successes we've had drone fishing. And finally 8, as a bonus, for those using a fishing drone with a camera, I've included a few filming tips as well.
So, part 1. Choosing what fishing drone suits your needs best. And a question that's always asked on drone fishing pages is, what is the best drone for drone fishing? I generally reply with, you actually need to know what your requirements are first before you start asking others what drone they recommend. So to make this easier, I've created 3 key questions that should help you figure out what is the right fishing drone or drones for you. Firstly, what is your max budget, as drones can range significantly from under $1,000 all the way up to $5,000 plus. Secondly, what payload do you need for drone fishing? Do you just want to send out like a couple of baits 200 meters offshore on, say, a surf caster, or do you need a huge payload for flying out long lines or big shark baits? And lastly, 3, what other special features or specifications does your drone need? For example, does your drone need a camera? Do you need an automatic release, or is manual okay? Does it need to be waterproof, etc.? Asking yourself these 3 questions will all help narrow right down which drone will suit your needs best. Knowing your budget is relatively straightforward, but determining what payload you need isn't so simple. It's not just the drone, bait, and the sinker weight that you need to consider. There are actually multiple factors when drone fishing that add up to the combined weight or drag force on the drone, including wind speed, wind direction, the weight of your release aid, and actually how much line is dragging along in the water as it's flying out your bait. From my personal experience, if a drone's maximum payload is 600 grams, in very windy conditions flying out at least 500 meters offshore, your realistic carry weight can drop by at least 200 grams. So for myself, in reality, I needed a drone with a maximum payload of at least 600 grams. And as for the specs and features I needed from my drone, I wanted a drone that was quite light, could fold up and fit in a small bag for traveling, be able to do multiple flights just on one battery. And since I film videos obviously for this YouTube channel, I absolutely needed this drone to be able to take HD footage as well. I've actually been very impressed with this drone. It's taken some surprisingly big baits in quite nasty weather, and we've landed some incredible fish using it. But like all drones, it's got its cons. The payload of this drone is limited to that kind of medium-sized bait. Another con is it's got a manual release. And at times when there's lots of wind, there's a big bow on the line, it becomes quite difficult to knock that out of the mechanical release. And the Mavic Air 2 is not waterproof. Most people assume buying waterproof that if your drone falls in the ocean, you're gonna get it back. But I've seen countless posts on Facebook saying, hey, lost my drone, 1,000 meters, it is waterproof. Has anyone seen it? And they unfortunately never get it back. So for myself personally, the only reason I would get a waterproof drone is if I wanted to fish in torrential rain.
So I've been wanting to upgrade my drone for quite a while now, so that I can send out multiple drops of much heavier baits in much nastier weather, like today by myself. But in the past, getting a drone with a much higher payload, an automatic release, and a 4K camera, while still being within my budget, simply wasn't feasible. Recently, Mark, Fishing Reminder, has been beta testing the newly released Aeroo Pro, and has been highly recommending it. And when I asked him all about it, he agreed that it ticks all my requirements. Hence, I've got one myself, and I can't wait to start pushing it to its limits.
And as you can see on this day of filming, it was extremely windy.
This is the level of wind we're fishing in.
But I was very impressed to see the Aeroo Pro punching through it.
If you're interested in getting one yourself or buying other drone fishing gear, make sure you check out Drone Fishing New Zealand, where you can use my discount code FISHEATREPEAT. Part 2, how to set up and use your fishing drone.
Before you can actually set up your drone, you need to physically get to the fishing spot. If you're lucky, you might be fishing at a vehicle access beach or for hard to reach places where you need to hike gear into, or where you may be using it for travel fishing overseas. I use my 50 litre HPA hybrid duffel bag. Or for easily accessible spots where you're taking a lot of gear, I found the compactable trolley works really well. So once we physically got to the beach, we can start setting up our fishing drone.
Historically, I've actually caught this with my hands, but now I use a drone landing pad. There's two reasons for that. Number one, catch it by your hands incorrectly, slice your fingers, which I've done many times. Secondly, as it's landing, it pushes a lot of sand up into the drone, which you obviously don't want. So yeah, highly recommend using a drone pad first. In terms of the accessories, I've just got a prop cover there. This was about $7 from AliExpress. We open up our drone here. Got the lens cover here. I usually use a polarized lens so that we can see out on the water, and I explain that a bit later why that is. Now I actually add extendable legs onto this. And what these do is again keep that drone up off the ground and stop sand and grit going into your drone. The second thing it does is when you got your nylon attached to Gannett Sport, that keeps it away from the drone and stops it tangling up into the props as you're taking off, because the Mavic Air 2 is actually quite a surprisingly low drone. One other safety tip I have as well when you're setting this up is just to double check your propellers. Make sure there's no nicks and cuts. It does start to affect the flight capability, and obviously worst case you end up with your drone in the water. Now the next thing I'm adding on here is the Gannett Sport. This is a mechanical sport release, base backer drone, so you put that at the back here, just attach that on there, just try and get it relatively in the middle of the drone.
I've always used the mechanical Gannett Sport release and have been using this successfully for over 3 years now on both the Mavic Air and Air 2. It's been extremely reliable, and I've literally carried out hundreds of faultless drops. My advice is trust in Gannett. There is also the Gannett X Sport, which has both automatic and manual release, so it's easy to use by yourself, but it does way more, meaning you sacrifice your bait payload.
Turn that on there. For the drone batteries, I actually number my drone batteries. So this is number 3, I've got 1 and 2, and I just go through them in numerical order. Get the little thumbsticks there, screw them on. We open this up, and then we connect the phone. Turn on the controller. We've actually already turned on the drone. You want to wait till that unable to take off is gone. It says now takeoff permitted, means the GPS home is all set up. Now in terms of settings, I go into a few more of my camera settings later on, but that's mainly around filming. I make sure that I'm in sport mode. That does reduce some of the obstacle avoidance, but lets you see your drone out much more powerful at full capacity. When you're filming, change the settings. You also want to make sure under your advanced safety settings, signal lost, return to home. If you have it on hover or descend and it loses signal 500 meters out, it's going to fall in the drink.
And if using a mechanical release, make sure you have calibrated the tension for the weight you're sending out. You calibrate the Gannett Sport release by increasing or decreasing the tension of the spring against the ball bearing release aid. I always set my tension on the lighter side, as I would much rather it pops off too early as it's flying out, rather than get stuck on the drone 400 meters offshore. And the easiest way I found to calibrate for the correct weight is to clip on that approximate weight onto a short trace below the drone and manually hold, then lightly shake the drone as if you're knocking the bait off like a rod. You want the bait to stay attached with small movements, but immediately drop off with that small jerk. In terms of what bait I use, I try and mix up the bait I'm using to increase my chance of catching a fish. Usually using a combination of both soft, oily baits like tuna or pilchard, along with tougher, less oily baits like squid or kahawai. I try and stick the hook through the skin layer twice if I can to help keep the bait on. And I also find scaling a fish with tough scales like kahawai makes it much easier to bait the hooks as well. And for those softer baits that fall off easily, I usually wrap them up in bait cotton. I then clip on my pre-baited hooks onto the backbone of the next end trace, and in this case I was using 5 hooks, but the trace itself can hold up to 25. I like to place baits at the top for surface feeding fish like kahawai and trevally, and then I put baits at the bottom for bottom feeders like snapper and gurnard. So once my drone is set up and my fishing rig is baited, I then connect the rig to my sacrificial drone trace, then connect that into the drone release aid and onto my main line using a clip swivel.
So we're all connected up. I've got the baits all connected there. We have 2 3-ounce sinkers at the end there.
I find using 2 3-ounce breakaway sinkers is actually more effective at holding the baits than 1 6-ounce sinker, as the sinkers act like a chain on the bottom and seem to hold down better. So if you're struggling in big swells and your line is still drifting down the beach and your drone can't send out lots of weight, try using 2 smaller sinkers instead. And if you're using an electric reel, don't forget to connect it and have it turned on before you start sending out the baits. Otherwise, the line distance won't be zeroed correctly on the reel.
So now we're launching.
Takeoff. Home point updated.
Also, same as when you're looking out for other stuff, always make sure you're looking out for other people as well. We've already asked those guys, they're going straight and right, so we're going to go left.
Unlike spin reels, overheads always have the risk of overrunning and bird's nesting. So whether you're drone fishing by yourself or have someone else helping you, to prevent overruns, keep an eye on the reel and lightly press your thumb on the spool or reduce your drone speed accordingly.
Alright, cool. Now we're going to actually get my lovely wife to help me. Alrighty, so we're flying this out.
I recommend flying your drone out at around 30 to 40 meters up. Flying out this high keeps that line from your rod pointing upwards and out of the water, reducing the strain on the drone. And flying a bit high also means if something goes wrong, like your drone starts dropping low or you can't knock it off, you have a bit of time to sort it out before your drone goes in the drink.
So we're at 120 meters there. This one I'm going to fly it out a little bit further because it's on the electric reel setup. And on my Surfcaster we're going to fly it in quite a lot closer.
Now for an automatic release, you can simply press a button and drop the bait. But for the mechanical Gannet Sport release, I increase the speed, then we put the drag on and give it a little tug as well to make sure it's dropped off.
Yeah, anytime now, hon, and give it a good jerk. Easy as that. And there we have it, guys. That is how to effectively launch your Mavic Air 2 and Gannet Sport release. Hey guys, if you've made it this far through in the video, I assume it's been helpful for you. Please show your appreciation by hitting that subscribe button if you haven't already. Cheers.
Part 3. Deciding which fishing rig is best for you to use. The beauty of drone fishing is you can basically use whatever fishing rig you like, whether it be a long line or just a small trace. So the most important thing for a drone rig is making sure that your bait and your sinker are hanging at least 3 meters below your drone when it's in the air. When your bait is actually connected to the drone, it starts to swing just like a pendulum. And when it swings, the drone actually starts to counterbalance that swinging. And if the line is too short, it starts to swing faster and faster and can end up going up and over your drone and into your props. Because I use various drone rigs of varying lengths, to ensure all of these rigs hang at least 3 meters below the drone, I attach every rig to my custom made sacrificial drone trace. This is a 4 meter long rig where on one end I have a treble swivel connected to a 30 centimeter long piece of fluorocarbon with a dropper loop. And then it's a 3 meter long trace with a clip swivel on the other end. And how this works, the bottom clip swivel clips onto any of the drone rigs I'm using, and then at the top of the rig on the treble swivel I connect onto my clip swivel, which is on my main line, to my rod and reel, which you would have already seen in part 2, and I get that 30 centimeter loop knot and connect that into the drone. The reason I use that 30-pound fluoro every single time is because the thinner the diameter of the line, the easier it is to pop off the drone, and making sure that it's always the same thickness makes it much easier to calibrate and make sure it's going to pop off. In terms of fishing rigs themselves, I've got 4 main fishing rigs that I use for drone fishing. The first is what I call a standard dropper rig. Got 5 to 7 hooks attached with loop knots, and they're literally tied onto the backbone there. I also sometimes add tubing to prevent any tangles. And then you just loop tie in a circle hook there. I use BKK circle glows mainly, and you can even use it for a soft bait. And I use this rig here when I'm fishing in a lot of foul or an area where I might get busted off and I don't want to lose an expensive rig. So the second rig is this Naxan pre-made drone fishing rig. This is where you actually have a long backbone trace. I think this is around 12 meters. And it's got 25 spots where you can attach a hook. It's just got 2 crimps there. Then you have a separate long line hook with a little clip. You just clip that in that spot between the 2 crimps, so it can move a little bit in between there, but actually locks it in place on the backbone. The beauty of this trace is the hook can actually continually swing freely around the backbone, meaning it significantly reduces twists and tangles. Because it's got tubing, it further reduces twists and tangles, and it doesn't allow the line to wrap around on itself. If you do get a tangle, which is quite difficult, you can just simply unclip the hook, and you just unravel it really quickly. The other brilliant thing about having a separate hook and trace line is you can actually bait these up and get these prepped well in advance of when you start fishing. Now my next two rigs, a little bit more basic. This one here is just kind of my big bait surfcaster rig. It just has a snelled hook at the end. It's an 8-bar hook there, and then I usually use a smaller 3 up to a 5-bar hook, and then that's onto a treble swivel, onto a sinker at the bottom. And lastly, just as an example, this is my live bait fishing rig. Very simple, it just has a live bait hook there on a trace and then onto a loop at the top, and sometimes I'll add a balloon at that top as well. As I said, once you've got the sacrificial drone trace, you can literally attach any fishing rig you want, whether it be a pre-made rig or a custom rig you've made yourself. It makes it super easy, and I'd highly recommend doing that yourself. Part 4, showing what rod and reel setups I use.
So I've got 4 rod and reel setups that I use.
Each one of these used for a specific purpose depending on where I'm fishing and what fish I'm targeting. And like everything in life, they each have their pros and their cons.
The first one
is my standard surf casting setup.
The Penn Liveliner 8500 on a TK Galactic 14-foot 3 surfcaster.
This one is probably my favorite setup for fighting fish, and I've had a lot of fun using it. The pros to this reel is it's got a bait release function, which makes it perfect for sending out large baits close into shore, targeting big fish, where I need a strong reel and nice long rod to keep the fish and line high up and away from breaking waves to keep the line off and prevent snags. This is also actually my main surf casting setup, and I usually hand cast out a bait as soon as I get to the beach while setting up my drone to increase the chance of catching a fish. The cons to this setup, it's obviously manual, and the rod is actually quite long, so it gets tiring retrieving baits manually all day.
And it can only hold about 500 meters of line, so if you want to go up further, you're going to have to use a bigger reel.
Then I have my electric reel setup. This is a Shimano Forcemaster 9000, powered by a 10,000 milliamp hour electric battery on the newly released Ocean's Legacy Big Bait Special. It's a 13-foot 2 drone fishing rod, and it's designed for overheads. This is my main setup for sending out baits real far out wide, at least 300 meters out offshore. And with such a long rod length, just like my surfcaster setup, it actually keeps the line high up out of the swell and reduces snags. But unlike the surfcaster, this specialized drone rod has actually got quite a shortened butt. What it means is that you can stick it in your gimbal there, obviously when it's fully extended, and fight a fish a lot easier than having to either dig it way out there or have it down there on the ground. There's really just one con to this setup here. It's electric, so it's obviously not as fun to fight the fish as a manual rod, but you can still obviously manually wind if you're keen enough. The third is my topwater setup. This is a Penn Slammer 5500 on my Catch 3-piece travel rod.
Pretty similar to the surfcaster,
but the rod is just a little bit shorter, and I mainly use this for travel fishing, where I obviously can't take such a long rod on the plane. And finally, number 4, my land-based game fishing setup.
This is a Shimano Tynos 30-wide 2-speed on a Shimano Therese 50 to 80 pound rod.
The pros of the setup, it's a big overhead reel. It allows you to really dig into the fish. It's used for sending out big shark baits or big live baits, and it's obviously a much cheaper option compared to the electric reel setup. The cons, it is an overhead. So unlike spin reels, when you're sending out a bait with the drone, it can easily overrun. It's also not electric, and it's quite a heavy setup. So it's a bit overkill for sending out your smaller baits. Now obviously there are plenty other rod and reel options out there, including different brands. These are just the rod and reel setups I use and that suit my drone fishing needs best. There is a lot of people with high payload drones who use a long line and electric winch, just like torpedo fishing. This is a good option for those who may not want to or even be able to wind in a heavy rod and reel, but still want to get out for a fish to feed the family. In reality, you can actually use any rod and reel setup you want for drone fishing and still make it work. Part 5, choosing where and when to drone fish. Now, I don't consider myself an expert in picking the best fishing spots, but here are just a few tips that I use when deciding where and when to fish. Firstly, I search on fishing forums before I go and read up whether it's worth fishing there and how people are fishing there, tides, baits, etc. And you can even look at my videos on all the different places we fished to check if it's worth fishing there for yourself as well. Secondly, I look on the Avionics app for like deeper spots, areas near rivers and outlets, and areas without lots of rocks and foul to prevent snags and bust-offs. Thirdly, when I get to the fishing spot, I try and find a calmer area on the surf where there's a rip and likely a deeper hole, or whether the water is darker in color, which you can see with a polarized lens on your drone. Fourthly, I use Mark Fishing Reminders at fishingreminder.com, which indicates the best times and tides to go fishing. For number 5, I always actually try and fish the outgoing tide.
Not really because of the fish, but because it means when you set your rods, you don't have to keep moving or you get back up the beach
as the tide comes in. And for 6, I try and fish at different depths and distances out from the beach. If I'm still not getting any bites, say I'm out at 600 meters and it's an electric reel, I'll dial that up just a little bit on a slow retrieve. It's only at level 4 at the moment, and basically you're just imitating a drift. see if maybe the fish are biting at 500 or 400 on the way in. And lastly, number 7, my top tip of all is if you can, fish the change of light either morning or evening. They both work really well. If you're not catching any fish and you're going to catch a fish, it's going to be on change of light. Part 6, understanding drone aviation rules and regulations before you fly. Knowing the aviation rules is arguably the most important part of drone fishing, as the last thing you want is to get to the spot and find out you can't fly. Or worse still, you get fined for flying your drone in a prohibited airspace. My main advice is to double check the rules and regs for your country and your location yourself before you start. So when it comes to rules and regulations, refer to the actual regulation online or contact your civil aviation authority. And for those flying drones overseas outside of New Zealand, your rules may be completely different. For example, when I was in Rarotonga, I needed to apply for a permit upon arrival and I needed to notify and gain approval from air traffic services before I could fly. Whereas in the UK, you need to sit a test and obtain a drone operator ID license and have that displayed on your drone. And then even for drone fishing itself, in some countries there are restrictions on the number of hooks you're allowed to use, and some countries unfortunately don't allow drone fishing at all. For New Zealand, in accordance to the Civil Aviation Act 1993, standard drones need to comply with Part 101 of the Act with these 6 rules in general. From my experience, as a general rule of thumb, I've found you can't fly a drone in New Zealand over most public land without a permit. Thankfully, most of the public place rules don't apply to launching your drone below that high tide mark on the beach, which is very fortunate for those of us who are drone fishing. Another tip is, before I decide to drone fish in a new location, I always double check the spot I want to fish on the DJI Fly app before I go there to make sure it's not a restricted airspace or a controlled area. If you are going to fly in a restricted airspace or controlled area, then you need to do it through the AirShare app and obtain permission accordingly. And lastly, just for safety, always make sure you're looking out for any possible aircrafts in the air, any children, dogs or other people around you, and make sure that there's a clear area away from where the drone's launching so you don't end up with nylon and rods in your props. These drones are very powerful and the drone props can do some serious damage. And just to reiterate, I'm not an aviation expert, please check the regulation yourself. So part 7, showing some of the epic sessions we've had drone fishing already. First one is where my wife did something incredible and managed to catch a snapper on a catch black label lively soft bait.
On the catch soft bait, get amongst it!
Second one is probably my most proudest moment of drone fishing, where we got 2 absolutely donkey goonered off Castle Point. And probably the video that changed my drone fishing on my YouTube channel, where I was using my own handmade rig and we managed to get 3 kahawai in one go. And there's been heaps of awesome sessions up north, fishing with my old man and my family and friends. And lastly, when we did our South Island mission, and Jenny managed to catch an awesome lemon fish or rig by using whole fresh crab. As you can see, there is so much flexibility and opportunities with drone fishing. I'd highly recommend getting into it yourself if you haven't already. And lastly, as a bonus, part 8, drone camera filming tips. This is for those of you that might have a drone with a camera that you not only use for fishing, but also for filming. So firstly, let's talk lenses. If you're gonna film in bright sunlight, you're gonna need an ND filter to reduce the glare. The higher the filter grade, the better it is in the higher light. And if you want to film over water and get that nice refraction through the water, you're going to need a CPL lens or polarized lens filter. Then to get the clearest and most stable photos and videos, make sure your drone is set to the cinema mode. I've also actually adjusted the sensitivity of these joysticks and the rudder movement so that the drone moves more gently when turning with the joysticks. Then if you want to film clearly and film nice slow motion video, you need to film in 60 FPS or higher. This allows you to slow that video down in your editing down to 30 frames per second or 24, but gives you the same clarity as if you're filming at normal speed at 4K 30. But just remember, the higher your frame rate, the more images are in each second and the larger your file will be. For your camera's exposure settings, aperture, ISO, shutter speed, etc. I'm definitely no expert, so I suggest just Googling optimal settings for your drone. For those of you who want to launch a drone from a boat, I strongly recommend getting yourself a handheld drone shooting stand or gimbal. You can pick these up online for about $10 and they allow you to very safely launch and retrieve your drone in a moving boat. And lastly, unlike when you're launching from the beach where you always want it set to return to home, when you're launching from a boat or any moving object, best to set it to hover when signal is lost. And that is the end of my drone fishing video, explaining everything I currently know about drone fishing. Assuming you've made it all the way to the end, I'm hoping this video has been helpful for you. And if you haven't subscribed already, please hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and please let me know in the comments what your favorite part was, or if you think I left something out. Assuming you like this tutorial, make sure you check out my tutorials here, and for drone fishing, make sure you check out all my drone fishing stuff here. Thanks so much.